Welcome to the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. Each week, this webinar series features an extraordinary individual that provides valuable and impactful services, helping to transform the capabilities of their nonprofit clients. Join us as we explore a variety of topics, all vital to the success of nonprofit organizations. Learn and grow from the experience and expertise of our featured guests. Without further delay, let's introduce you to the host of the Nonprofit Edge podcast series, Chris Looney.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Nonprofit Edge, where we explore the leadership, culture, and internal dynamics that shape strong, effective nonprofit organizations. Each episode is designed to help executive directors, CEOs, and senior leaders navigate the realities of nonprofit leadership with greater clarity, confidence, and impact. And today's conversation focuses on a critical and often overlooked leadership role in nonprofit organizations, what we've called the CPO. And no, it's not the Chief Philanthropy Officer, it's the Chief Political Officer. And not in the partisan sense, not politics in, what we're dealing with on a daily basis, but rather the internal influence, the alignment, and the advocacy required to move fundraising and mission forward inside an organization. And joining me today is Randall Hallett, CEO and founder of Hallett Philanthropy. Randall's a nationally recognized voice in nonprofit fundraising, has his own podcast that I encourage you all to explore, and also works extensively in board engagement and within executive leadership. And through his firm, his speaking, and his long-running podcast, Around with Randall, he helps nonprofit leaders better understand the internal dynamics that either accelerate or quietly undermine fundraising success. So thank you for joining us today, Randall. We're excited to have you on the show.
It's a privilege, Chris. Thanks for having me.
You bet. I am so excited to dig into this topic because I haven't listened to the podcast. I didn't want to because I didn't want it to influence my way of thinking. So I'm bringing fresh ears to this, as are many of our listeners. And in that episode, you described or you shared the idea of the nonprofit leader as the chief political officer. And when leaders hear that phrase, it can make them uncomfortable. Why don't you tell us what you mean by CPO in a nonprofit context?
Well, and I think it's so important because organizations are living beings, themselves, with people who have interests and power dynamics and things of that nature. And I totally agree with you on the concept of it not having anything to do with left, right, Republican, Democrat. This is about how organizations work. And part of it comes from my experience at the University of Nebraska as the chief philanthropy officer, part of it in the consulting that I've done. And I was so young when I became, in my mid-30s, the chief philanthropy officer, and I look back and wonder why Glenn Fosdick ever thought that was even a thought, let alone a good idea. What I realized is that the larger the organization and the more complex the organization, and then you add to that usually those larger, more complex organizations don't have a CEO as someone who's come up through philanthropy. They've come up through operations, they've come up through program. And then there's this philanthropic element, and everybody around that senior executive table doesn't quite have the understanding we do. And so politics become part of this, and really it's about power. And you become, as the chief philanthropy officer, this nexus of all of these elements: finance, strategy, the ability to leverage relationships. You're interacting with the community from a board or donor perspective. All of these things come together, and as a result, you have a lot of well-meaning people. Nobody's nefarious or criminal here, but they don't understand what we do and how we do it. And what ends up happening is you become this kind of nexus of navigation, communication, alignment that they're unused to. They're used to having more control. And we come in, and donors have opinions and money has influence. And all of a sudden, the dynamics of a table around an executive conference room change. What I realized is that the ability to be a diplomat and see kind of the long-term relationships internally become critically important to success in philanthropy generally, and more specifically for you as a chief philanthropy officer as a leader.
Yeah, I'm laughing a little bit because it's so true. But also, we said CPO, usually Chief Philanthropy Officer, then Chief Political Officer. You said diplomacy, so I started thinking CDO, Chief Development Officer, Chief Diplomacy Officer.
Similar thing.
And I just have never heard anyone mention the word diplomacy when it comes to fundraising. And I think it's a total miss that more people don't understand the value of diplomacy in the process of fundraising. And I'm just wondering, why is it so underestimated?
Well, I can tell you why I underestimated it. I what I realized was is that we're all around the table wanting the same thing. The nonprofit mission to move the community in a positive way, depending if you're a food bank, a hospital, a university, whatever, it doesn't make a difference.
Right.
But the issue of diplomacy comes from a way of what I thought of as fighting frustration. My first year and a half, I many times was going home and looking at my beautiful wife saying, they don't get what we do. And the only person who was losing in this was me. And by the way, philanthropy was losing. And what I figured out was is that if I played this more in a diplomatic way, if I built alliances and relationships that were really based on trust internally, two things happened. Number one, my frustration level as how philanthropy fit into the largesse of, a multi-billion dollar organization became a lot easier, it became a lot more functional. And my frustration diminished. The second thing is we raised more money. And those two things were the reason I kept coming back to this term. And part of it was one of my two mentors in my career, Glenn Fosdick, who's now retired. He kept saying, you keep beating on the same heads and you're getting no results or the same results. Do you want to try this a different way? And it was that kind of mentoring that allowed me to see, I have to bring them along with me and I have to meet them where they are, which is all about diplomacy. It's about that negotiation of they have their perspectives, I have my perspectives. Where can we work together? How do I educate them to move them a little bit more my way? That is a long-term relation trust-based opportunity. And that's what, to me, diplomacy really is all about. And we have, and you are an industry leader as well, how many times do we talk to the CDO, the CPO, the President Foundation, whatever the title is, and they're frustrated because they can't get the organization to move. And this is where I come back to, are you just yelling and screaming, or are you thinking about power bases? Or are you thinking about, because that's all politics. It's internal politics. And we need these individuals. I need a CFO to be on my side. I need the chief strategy officer to be on my side. I need the chief marketing officer to be on my side. And there's two ways to do it. You can force them, which does not work, or you can build diplomacy, relationships, and trust, and that does work to move the organization forward.
Yeah. I mean, it does sound a little bit like 4D chess. Does it require the individual to have a Harvard degree in psychology and business? What are the
It's a great question. I don't have any of those, so if I had any success,
Good.
I'm not saying I did. I'm overly educated with all these degrees. None of them from Harvard for sure. I don't even think I applied there.
Should have mentioned Nebraska. Sorry.
Well,
sorry.
yes, as you can see behind me, where the N stands for knowledge. That's the way we look at it here in the Midwest. I think the important thing is maybe along the lines of psychology, but it's not psychology per se. Is can you put yourself in their position? So when I would meet with, let's take Rosanna Morris, the chief nursing officer, she's got this huge job of managing all of the nurses and leading the nursing effort throughout a huge organization. The one thing she doesn't have time for is philanthropy because she's got plenty to do. She's not eating bonbons in her office. How do I get where she's at? How does philanthropy affect her? How do I minimize its time but maximize its outcome? Well, the psychology of it is for me to think about. It was, Steve Smith as the chief medical officer. It was Tad Pullen, who's now down at MD Anderson as chief marketing officer. They had their own jobs, and instead of just running and yelling at them, and I don't mean that literally, I had
Right.
to think about how do I help them do their job and be more effective, and how could philanthropy do the same? And that is a psychology. That is a willingness to put what you think is obvious and what we think is obvious in our profession aside, to be able to talk with them in the way in which will allow them to understand what we're talking about in terms of the collaboration that's necessary. That is a psychology. And, you don't have to work at it that hard. I mean, the CFO wants more money. The CNO wants better conditions for the nurses. If you're in a university, the provost wants more opportunity for professors to do research and to, be able to teach and to engage with students and collaborative efforts from a research perspective. If you just take a step back, you can begin to see where they're at. Then you can begin to ask questions, and then you can give them, hopefully, where philanthropy can be part of the solution rather than just an additive thing that they have to do.
Great reframing. You talk a lot about, in the context of the chief political officer, how fundraising challenges are often internal and not external. What are the most common internal obstacles you see that slow or block fundraising momentum?
Two stand out, easily identified. Number one is the disconnect between strategy and philanthropy. That
Okay.
strategy of the organization requires people who run and manage the programmatic side of whatever that nonprofit does. They want to accomplish something, but yet philanthropy takes time to develop the relationships and kind of the coalescing of the community or constituency to want to support it philanthropically. Well, those run at two different speeds, because you may get a hospital or a soup kitchen or let's say they support housing. They're like, we're ready to go. We're going to go do this. But philanthropy wasn't at the table when those initial conversations were starting. So the time that we need to build up what we think of as really elemental, but they don't understand case statements. And we want to, maybe do our own little internal feasibility study. Let's go talk to our top 10 donors, kind of present it to them. What do you think about this? How would you change this? What would you be interested? Chris, what I find is that difference in time is a misalignment of kind of this strategy or strategic initiatives that are being developed. So the
Yeah.
first is strategy. The
Okay.
second is finance. Is that finance sees, and I'm not advocating changing FASB or best practice rule with accounting, and I took a lot of that with my MBA, but there are things that we can do to align with finance and have finance align with philanthropy that we don't utilize. And having hard conversations, one of the things that I talk about recently more and more often, with 85% of the assets in the United States being behind what I call a marketable wall, planned giving has to be an important factor for any nonprofit. And I don't think anybody disagrees with that. The problem is our incentives for our gift officers are based on finance, which is all about cash, because they can market cash or pledges in terms of booking it in this year, which it goes to the balance sheet, income statements, all that.
Right.
What I'm advocating is a conversation where we double count, not account, planned gifts. So we incentivize gift officers to bring in more planned gifts. And then we incentivize them to steward those gifts until the passing of the particular donor who's indicated an intent. Finance goes crazy about that. Like, well, we can't do
Of course.
that. And my answer is why? And we're back to politics. It's about power. And if you can find ways of dealing with those issues financially, what you do is you create a more systematized approach about maximizing philanthropy for the strategic needs. So you asked what the two were. Easy. Strategy runs at different speeds. We need more access earlier so that we can kind of set up the game the way we know how to do it, to build those relationships and bring the community into those kind of conversations. And number two, finance, and I use the planned giving as just one of a myriad of examples, whether it's metrics or how we count money or reconciliation or whatever. How do we, maybe even just having the infrastructure to support some of the financial things we need in philanthropy. Those two, finance and strategy, are the two that I see the most disconnected.
Yeah, that's great. And I appreciate that. I was anticipating that you were going to be talking about culture, communication, or sort of unspoken assumptions? Are those relevant or material to this conversation?
They're incredibly relevant, but I view those as like a layer on top of the cake, like the ice. You have to
Okay.
start with that. So if we think about the modern CEO, and this is what I wrote about in my book last year in Vibrant Vulnerability, there's great studies out there that talk about the kind of the path of a CEO, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, that's kind of the two behemoths. I throw religion into that. So whether it's a parish priest or it's a minister in the church or it's a rabbi in the synagogue or an imam in a mosque, they did not come up in any one of those kind of sectors of our nonprofit world most of the time with philanthropy as a part of their job or any mention of it in some cases. And yet to become the CEO, and all of a sudden here comes somebody like me, somebody like you, and say, yeah, I report to you. What do you want to do here? And they're like, I don't know anything about this, but yet they're supposed to be omnipotent, have all the answers. And so the first layer you're talking about, culture, communication, understanding, is you have to be willing, going back to kind of where we started, to educate very slowly, very simply, with stories, with simplicity, with dashboards, sometimes even bringing them into donor conversations. That's kind of an extreme where I've done that and with clients in my own work to have someone better understand that what I'm telling you isn't necessarily my perspective. It's the perspective of the people with money who want to be philanthropic, and they're running into hurdles that we are just self-creating, that they at a certain point, one or two, they say, I'll give my money somewhere else. I've got
Right.
options. So it's that over layer of kind of the icing on the cake where you have to start before you get to the actual cake to be able to give them some basic principles. And that is all about what you said, culture, basics of what we do, just the simplicity of because they're used to dashboards in terms of that kind of layer of executive leadership, is being able to present your dashboards in a simple way that shows the work that we do. And you may think, well, that's pretty elemental. And my response is, yeah, but they don't understand what we do. They don't know how many meetings it takes to get a $5 million gift. They sometimes think, well, don't you just go ask Bob or Cindy? And it's like, oh, I did 12 meetings just to get them to the point where I felt like I could even broach the subject of asking them for the 5 million. And that wasn't even an ask, and it wasn't even a soft ask. It was just broaching the subject. But look, could we talk about this? All of that is what you're talking about culture, understanding, and engaging, keeping it simple to get them to the first stages where you can have the appropriate conversations.
That makes total sense. Why is it that the CEO or executive director, whatever the title is so uniquely positioned to act as the chief political officer when it comes to fundraising?
I would say also organizational. Two things. Number one is if you think about an executive table, university, hospital, social service agency, it doesn't make a difference. That the chief philanthropy officer has their fingers just by what we do in almost every one of the other executives' lives. CFO, we got finance. If it's a university, it's the provost. It's the things we're raising money for. And then you've got the marketing aspect, that's communication. And then you've got admissions. We're part of the storytelling. So there's, if it's a hospital, it's nursing and medical doctors, and we're at this nexus. And the only other person who really is in that same nexus, but at a much higher level, is actually the CEO. They're ultimately
Right.
responsible for all of it,
Right.
which brings me to the second thing. When you think about, for most of us and most nonprofits, when they go out and hire a CEO, they're not hiring a philanthropy expert. They're just not. They're hiring someone who's an expert in the area of the nonprofit that serves the community.
Right. Right.
So in many ways, we're unqualified to be a CEO from I call it the general perspective. I actually think some of us would actually be good CEOs because we'd look at it more holistically.
100%.
That's not where we're at for most industries or sectors of the nonprofit world. this came to be with me, and I realized this about 2 or 3 years into my time at Nebraska, was it, I had to look at my CEO, and I finally said, I was just blunt. I said, Glenn, behind closed doors, when you sit at the executive table, there's 8 of us. He's one, 7 of us reporting to him.
Yeah.
I said, there's only one person that didn't wake up this morning wanting your job. It was me. And he kind of looked at me and he thought, and he finally said, I think you're right. And I said, that doesn't make them bad people. That makes
Right.
them wanting to grow and to be leaders. And I'm all for that. But it
Right.
also should tell you who to trust. Because at the end of the day, I don't want the only way I look good is if you look good. If you
Yeah.
look bad, I look bad. If you look good, we look good. I have no interest other than yours. I am completely vested with you. And so when you marry the two, what you end up with is this nexus of all these parts of the organization philanthropy has connection to. It's like a spider web. And you also, in some ways, are a mini me of the CEO in the same vein, and you aren't interested in his or her job, which makes the role of politics easier to manage if you do it in the right way, because you're already connected to all the people if you do it well, all the areas, and you're only supporting the one person who has, at the end of the day, the largest interest in the organization positively, and that's the CEO. So there's all of these connections if you look at them the right way, and politics, power, relationships, trust form all of that together. They are the kind of the web of the spider web between all of these elements.
Power, relationship, trusts. Love it. Can there, given what you were saying about the chief political officer being an executive or the CEO, and the chief political officer being the um, head of philanthropy, I mean, can there be two co-chief political officers in the organization?
I think yes, if you realize the power dynamic, and I'll steal from our constitutional governmental structure. Uh, you're the vice president. You are subordinate. It's almost the way, and I told Glenn this many times. I said, "You're kind of like my wife," and he would look at me, and I'd say, "She's in charge at home. You're in charge here. My job is to fill the gaps and to execute the strategy you put in front of me, because that's the way it works at home too." And at first, I think he laughed. And eventually, and I've used that example with other CEOs and CPOs as they're trying to build their relationships. Many of the time, they come to think about it and they go, it's actually true. You have to realize that you are subservient to the CEO. If they have a strategy that you don't believe in, and I have a conversation with every boss, now I'm my own boss, but every boss I've ever had, I said, I have one promise for you. When the door shuts, as long as you allow me to be heard on interests issues that are my kind of responsibility, and I was always a chief philanthropy officer since I got out of law school, which is kind of an odd career path. As long as you allow me to be heard, I only have two things that I can do. If you make a decision I don't like, the only two options are I don't ever say a word, I go open the door and I go do my job and I support you, or I quit. There will not be a third option. I'm never going to undercut you, the organization, the strategy, or what we're trying to accomplish. That's that subserviency. They make decisions. They get paid to make decisions. It's almost like the scene in Moneyball where they're sitting down with all the scouts,
Outs.
and one of the older guys says, "I think we need to understand our roles here. We make recommendations, and Brad Pitt, who plays Billy Bean, he makes decisions, and he's only beholden to God and the owner." And there's some truth in that. So you can have a mini political connection, but you also have to realize you work at the behest and the direction of the CEO.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's credit Michael Lewis for coming up with the beautiful
Absolutely.
scripting there. Who knows if it actually happened that way, but
I'm going to believe it did because it's just awesome.
yeah, it is awesome. And Michael Lewis knows how to tell a good story, whether it's the exact words or not. But I do remember that moment very vividly. So well played there. Um, you emphasize that fundraising does not fail because of donors alone. It fails when organizations are misaligned internally. What does real alignment look like between development programs and leadership?
So At a macro level, I would describe it, and this is all about the politics, where you almost cannot distinguish between the strategy and the philanthropy. They're so intertwined
Okay.
that you like they're paired together. When we do something, philanthropy is always a part of it, may not be all of it, but that you literally cannot pull them apart at times. That's the macro. The micro is more challenging. It means philanthropy being an active participating member of strategic planning committees, groups, whatever. And that was one of the great gifts I got from Glenn Fosdick at the medical center is I was on the strategic planning committee. I didn't
Right.
say a single thing. We met every month for 2 years or for 7 years. What am I going to add to, this? But I would give him a nod, and that would tell him, I think there's something philanthropic in the planning part of this. Let's take a month, table it, and let me work to figure out if we can build some philanthropy into it. So part of it's that you are at the table. Number two, which is actually even more elemental, is that you got to be reporting to the chief executive officer. You got to be reporting to the CEO, or you don't know what's going on. You're not at the table where the decisions are being made. And that's sometimes a challenge because they offshoot that to somebody else. And you're like, now we got a gap and we have lack of communication knowledge and integration. It's also that when you are planning something, they have an understanding and a recognition that we need time to build out case statement, a feasibility study, feasibility conversations, run it up the flagpole with our donors if being done internally. There's a lot of different ways of doing it, but it can't be a spigot. We just don't turn it on. Here comes a bunch of money. So
Right.
those are the tactical pieces, but at the macro level, alignment really looks like philanthropy and strategy are intertwined, and you almost don't know where one starts and one ends because they're
Good.
always part of the conversation.
Yeah, that integration perspective is really, really important. When it comes to issues, resistance, things that need to be surfaced, how do you kind of do that as a political officer without damaging trust or morale?
So, number one, you do it privately, you do it behind a
Okay.
closed door, and you try to do it, I think, more individually. There were times, and I don't think we ever really got on the exact same page, the CFO and I at the medical center, but we had a lot of discussion. And it starts with I would go in with bringing my guard down and like, look, I'll be vulnerable. We're at a disagreement on X, Y, or Z, or you want this, I'm seeing it this way. Could we find a way to talk about how to make it work together? The second thing is you don't go running to your boss. In my case, was the CEO to solve your problems, and I give my father an immense amount of credit with that. He always taught me that your job is to solve as much of the problem as you can until it just physically cannot be done, and then that's what CEOs get paid for. But it's not doing end runs and looking for cover is not a sense of being a good leader or a good chief political officer.
Yeah.
Third thing is that there's a realization, and I wish nationally we had more of this, that it's okay to disagree. It's okay to have different perspectives. And all too often in our world, and this is true internally at most nonprofits and organizations, everybody's looking for the exact same thing to be replicated that came out of my mouth. Now it comes out of your mouth. And we're all different. We all have different perspectives. We have different experiences. We have different worldviews. The key is to come back to what the mission of the organization is. If our healthcare hospital is to take care of the community, if we start with that premise, then we can build from that politically to find out how we can find where we are on the same page. And where we are on different pages, is there something in the middle we can agree upon? That takes a great deal of, and I love Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs, that takes a lot of self actualization. You have to be willing to be okay with somebody calling you a name and not worrying about it. Or you have to be willing to realize that they get upset and it's not personal. And I'm not sure I always did that very well. In fact, I would probably posit that I didn't at all. But I learned from that. And thus you come out with solutions rather than problems. And that's how you do, but it's closed door, it's one-on-one, it's small groups, it's about trying to figure out where they are and how you meet in the middle. And it's being good with who you are and what you believe, and being able to articulate that in a respectful way.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. I know boards have a big role in a lot of the work of the nonprofit especially around fundraising outcomes, but in a lot of other governance related and strategic planning ways and defining a lot of the future of path of the organization. And I'm wondering what the chief political officer's role is, whether it's the CEO or the CDO, what their role is in terms of navigating board dynamics, expectations, and influence connected to fundraising or connected to any of the issues.
So I think it's critical, and there's a kind of a first step you have to realize that there are two kind of structures when we talk about boards. One is that and some organizations have this. They've got an operational board and they got a foundation board or a fundraising board.
Yes.
That's different than having one board, and that plays a part in the political conversation.
Good.
So the operational board, if you have two separate boards, there are two major issues to consider, one for each. Number one is the operational board's focus normally is on the operations. I mean, they like philanthropy because it brings in cheap money, and our ROI is better than any other part of any other nonprofit. But they're not used to thinking about it. And if you're newer to philanthropy as an organization, you've got to bring them on board, because as much as you love your foundation board and they have function, and we'll talk about that in a second, they and what you do are subservient to the operational board. They set the direction of the organization. They own the fiduciary responsibility. So you can't ignore them, which means you need individual conversations. But before you do any of that, their employee is the CEO. It's not you. It's not the CFO. It's not the chief political or a provost or marketing officer. They have one employee if it runs well, the CEO. And if that's you, that's easier. But if it's not, we're back to politics. If you run to an end run around your boss, that's bad politically. So you have to start with the right function. They have one employee. So you've got to educate them. And every time, I didn't have a foundation board at Nebraska. We had one operational board, which meant every time I met with a board member, before I went and after I got back, I was sending an email to my boss saying, I'm going to meet with Bruce. Here's what we're going to talk about. And I'd come back and I'd say, here's what we talked about. So there would never be any surprises between him and his board.
Right. Yeah.
So that's if you have two boards. So you've got to figure out that power dynamic. If you have a foundation board, the second part of it is you have to clearly define what they do. In the days of, I come to a meeting, I do the mission moment, I review the finances, I have the CEO tell me a couple stories, I have a bad chicken dinner, lunch, or a sandwich, and I leave. If that's what you're doing politically, you're not structuring them in a way that can be the voice, the ears, the connection to the community where they're doing outreach and things of that nature. But you need the organization to support the concept of what their job description really should be, which is that connection piece. And help the CEO politically understand that in a closed door environment, they can be incredibly valuable about telling you what the community thinks about the organization, where the operational board may be focused on the internal workings of the nonprofit. And so you've got to kind of play with that to figure out where that's at. So you could have one board or two, but if you're not engaging them in the right way, then they're just bodies that show up and it doesn't work. And you've got to be respectful of the reporting structure to make sure you're doing it in the right way.
And they're all individuals themselves who have different reasons for being involved, different capacities as donors or connectors, different strengths, different weaknesses. They bring different assets and different perspectives on how you interact or engage with them as well. Are they going to be your partner? Do they see you as something lesser than? Do they not even want to give you the time of day? All of those things matter, right?
Couldn't agree more. And I think that speaks to the relationship you have with the CEO, with if there's a chief of staff, maybe it's a large organization who kind of manages sometimes the board on behalf of the CEO. You have to build those alliances internally to create the right conversations externally. And that's back to being political power and people's perspectives.
Yeah. I think there's going to be some folks that are uncomfortable because it feels manipulative or inauthentic. Um,
Yep.
is there a way to reframe that concern?
Yes. Do you want to be successful?
Come on, yes.
I think part of this is, and I have this discussion a lot with younger, and I say
Love
that
it.
now,
Please, yes.
gray haired. Everybody's younger. I used to be the youngest person almost every room I sat in. Now I look around, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm the only guy with gray hair. Uh, I, People who are looking to become the chief philanthropy officer, president, foundation, whatever. I get asked a lot, what do I need to be aware of? And I'm like, you need to be aware of two things. Number one is that you don't understand what this means until you sit in the chair.
Yeah.
Until you sit in the chair and you have a full understanding, and every time somebody goes and does, they come back and they go, yeah, you're right. The second thing is that you're being hired to lead the fundraising efforts, whatever size you have. But frankly, your job has nothing to do with actual fundraising. It has to do with organizational relationship, power, politics. So if we're going to be just bluntly honest, and I started with because you want to succeed and get good evaluations to raise money and all these things.
Right.
The bigger the organization, the more the percentage of politics is going to be a part of your job.
Right.
I've done this too long, and those who say, well, that's dirty, that takes me away from what I really want to focus on. My answer is, I agree. Now let's get out of utopia, join the real world, and realize that success sometimes comes with a little dirt on our hands. It's not pure. It should be. I wish it were. But at the end of the day, my experience of almost 20 years of being a CPO or CDO or whatever title you want to throw on me tells me that there's negotiation and power dynamics, and it's just part of the deal, and it's 50% of the job. So if you're not willing to engage in this and you want to be a chief philanthropy officer, chief political officer, you're going to leave 50% of what actually happens every day, and you're going to isolate yourself, and eventually you're going to be shuttled out the door because you weren't part of the larger executive leadership team that's driving success for the organization.
Yeah, that's right. And there's certain things a diplomat is called on to do that don't need to be characterized as inauthentic or manipulative, but are endeavoring to create solutions where there's seemingly intractable differences.
I feel very comfortable saying this. Did I have disagreements with other leaders in the organizations which I was privileged to work in? Yes. Did I ever lie to them? No. Did I ever lie to myself? No, I don't think so. Did I always see things clearly? No. But if you don't lie and you don't misrepresent and you're honorable and honest, this is diplomacy. Again, it's okay to have differing opinions. What's the core mission of the organization? How does that strategy that we're looking to do move the organization forward? How can we both partner together to help do what the CEO, the boss, the board, whomever says we should go do?
Mm-hmm.
That is where the power of politics is at its best if you have that framework.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so two last questions.
Please.
I think they're quick. So for a nonprofit CEO listening today, if they feel like fundraising, for example, is stuck internally, what would the CPO tell you need to do?
Educate. I'll tell you my favorite all-time story where I knew I was working for a brilliant leader in Glenn Fosdick. We were struggling to kind of get everyone over the hump as to what philanthropy can and should do. And I made the recommendation. I said, Glenn, would you ever consider bringing the entire executive team on a site visit to a place that does it really well? And he kind of looked at me. He goes, really? I said, the 8 of us. And he looked at me. He says, as long as it meets calendar, we don't have anything major going on. He goes, I think that would help us educate everyone, including me, as to what it can be and should be and what it might look like. And we did that. Now, we got in trouble with the chief compliance officer because we all flew on the same plane there and back. And she was hot because she's like, if the plane goes down, we have a problem. We had never thought about it. God bless Cindy Smith.
Like, let's all get in the same car and drive.
That's exactly correct. Yes, it was a bad compliance problem. But what happened was, and I mean this sincerely, is we were at the airport coming home. We were only there like we flew out at 6 a.m. We came home, spent the night. and came home the next day. And it wasn't all philanthropy. They had some meetings, like the CFO met with the other CFO, and but I got enough of the time. And we're at the bar in the airport, and this chief medical officer raises his glass and says, "We need to give a toast to Randall because we've been hurting him more than we've been helping him and screwing philanthropy along the way. And I now understand." And I went, "Yep." Now, they didn't go because of me. They went because the CEO said they had to go. But
Sure,
if it
sure.
feels stuck, educate, small stories, examples. I took the chief experience officer, the head of patient experience, to another place so she could see how patient experience and philanthropy could work hand in hand on some issues. She came back with me and she goes, "Yeah, we're doing this all wrong. We're going to do it the way they do it, and it's going to work better." How do you get them to see what's possible without it being sometimes the authority? And it doesn't mean always bring in a consultant, and that's maybe, contrary to my business model. But the point is that there's lots of opportunities to bring in educational thought that's going to challenge the status quo, that's going to move the organization forward, and then build internal allies who can have an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. That's how you bring leaders together in those conversations. You can even bring donors in and say, "Look, I want to do this. You talk at me instead of with me. You don't ask my opinion. So I gave $5 million over here rather than you. And I really kind of thought it would be you, but you screwed it up." There's lots of different ways to show others that don't have maybe the level of knowledge, expertise, wisdom, and none of those things I have, but maybe others do like you, how to bring those things forward into the organizational leadership structure.
That's great. All right. So, final question. For nonprofit leaders who want to move fundraising forward this year, what's maybe the single most important mindset shift they need to make internally to help with that?
Take small steps. Too often in my consulting, and then I look back into my career, I tried to do too much at one time. The best example is I got to the medical center and very quickly began to figure out our operational board, who was made up of the who's who. And I always tell people there's more millionaires and billionaires in Omaha, Nebraska per capita than anywhere else in the United States. There's so much money, so much philanthropy. It's incredible. But I almost within 12 to 16 months was before the executive team saying, "I think we need a foundation." And I was taking this enormous step because I was like, I can get my own people that are going to help leverage the right relationships to be. And what it was seen internally was a power grab because I didn't do because you want a different title. It was about, and that was my fault. That wasn't the other executives' fault. Some were neutral. A couple of them were anti. Nobody was for. I didn't do my due diligence to have those individual small steps, build consensus, build an understanding. I just threw it out there. And that's an example of trying to do too much at one time. And my advice is pick through things that are small, that are going to build that credibility and that trust, those relationships. Make them manageable, make them reasonable. Not one or two over here, two or three over here, one. So you could have really small ones with different people and different executives, because as we've talked about, politics is local and everyone has a different perspective with different experiences. But start small. Don't try to, turn the ship 90 degrees in 5 seconds, because you can't. If you take it more manageably over time, longitudinally, you'll have more success. And that's the essence of great politics, is finding consensus one day after the next day after the next day about things we can agree upon, so we can help the organization. As I always talk about it, nonprofit philanthropy serves in this unique whole between for enterprise, which doesn't want to do certain things that don't make money, and government, which is not very efficient. We're trying to figure out how to solve that whole. Those small little steps are going to build everybody toward whatever that mission is that you serve, to make a difference in the community. And the small steps are how you get the politics moving forward in a more positive way.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, Randall, thank you for pushing nonprofit leaders to think differently about their role in fundraising, and for naming the internal leadership work that so often goes unspoken. Your insights remind us that fundraising success is rarely about tactics alone. It's about influence, about alignment, and leadership courage, and as you talked about, power, politics, et cetera, et cetera. So to our listeners, we hope this conversation helps you see your role not just as a manager or fundraiser, but as a chief political officer who can move your organization forward from the inside out. And so if you found this episode valuable, be sure to subscribe to the Nonprofit Edge. There are two other podcasts I would encourage you to check out as well, Lead for Good and also Mastering Fundraising. All three of them are where we interview extraordinary leaders and really dig into their strategies, their thoughts, their insights. And as you all learned from Randall, how to really reconsider things that are going to help you move the needle forward within your organization. So Randall, thanks again. And everybody else, we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.
Thank you for joining us for the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation and learned some important lessons from our featured expert. We always want our content to be informative and to position nonprofit leaders to succeed. Please join us again for our next podcast. In the meantime, we wish you all the best and encourage you to learn more about Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership by visiting our website at www.fulcrumleader.com.